Welcome to today's episode of Stay Juicy. I'm your host, Dr. Ayana, and today I'll be taking you on a deeply personal journey of transformation and self discovery as I recount my harrowing yet transformative experience at the Angel Valley Retreat Center in Sedona, Arizona, where an unexpected encounter with a scorpion became one of the most powerful symbols for change in my life. From navigating the physical and emotional roller coaster of menopause to leaving a successful 20-year career in high risk obstetrics, my story is about embracing evolution and finding empowerment in the midst of life's most challenging transitions. This episode marks the new beginning as we delve into the juicy aspects of midlife and exploring how we can live our best and most vibrant lives. Just to give you some context about kind of how and why I ended up in this situation, I was about 38 years old and, life was lifing. And I actually started to get this real kind of yearning sense of dissatisfaction, unsatisfaction, and just kind of confusion around where I was and where I was going and what the hell was going on. I really didn't know what needed to happen. I just had this sense that I needed to break away from my everyday life and I needed to go somewhere and figure out what the hell was going on? What's the next step here? Honestly, I don't even remember the steps that I took. That was actually 20 years ago. Um, though I do remember having this conversation. I randomly found this retreat center in Sedona, Arizona. I was on the East Coast and I remember it was in the evening and I just randomly called because I was just like, let me just call this place and see what's what. This man answered the phone. His name was Michael. And he spent at least 20, 30 minutes with me on the phone, listening and explaining kind of what this retreat center had to offer. And by the end of the conversation, I was like, I'm in, like, just sign me up. And the rest was history. And I'll let you hear the rest of it in the story. And my account of what happened in that week so period that I was in the Sedona Valley, getting a glimpse of what the vortexes could do for me. It was pitch dark. I was gripped with fear as I could hear the rumblings outside of my teepee. I was 2,000 miles away from home at an undisclosed location, and I started to worry that if something happened to me out here in the wilderness, nobody would even know where to look for my body. And it was at that moment that I realized, it's probably best to call my husband and tell him where I really was. That instead of checking into the timeshare that I was supposed to be checking into, it was a few miles away, I was several miles away in a teepee at the Angel Valley Retreat Center in Sedona, Arizona. But I had to get away and figure some things out. I had recently surrendered to a devastating struggle with infertility, and the adoption process wasn't much easier. I was 38 years old and peaking in my career as a high-risk OB, and I loved helping women get through the most challenging pregnancies. Despite the money, career, and 2 kids later, something was missing. The yearning that kept bubbling up was that somehow it was time for me to change, to move, to graduate. When I arrived at the retreat center, I was greeted by Michael. He gave me a tour of the facilities and said that if things got to be too much, I could always sleep in the dorms. Sleeping in the teepee, however, would give me the advantage of focusing the energies and expediting the clarity that I was seeking. After the tour, I asked Michael, what do I have to look out for here in the desert? And he responded, there's some rattlesnakes. You might see some wild pigs. And oh, yeah, watch out for the scorpions. Excuse me? Scorpions? That was not on my list of things that I needed to be worried about. Michael started referencing the archangels and the vortexes, and I honestly started to wonder, what the hell have I gotten myself into? Days passed. I walked in nature, baptized myself in the cold creeks. I walked the labyrinths, explored crystals, I prayed, and I even tried to understand what the hell these vortexes were all about. And the breakthroughs came charging in, one after another, after another. And after a few nights, I got accustomed to the rumblings outside of my teepee. But despite it all, I still had this crippling fear of the scorpion. I woke up the next morning feeling a shift. I reached for my socks and realized that something was out of place. And that something was indeed, in fact, and actually, the scorpion. Strangely, there was no fear when the scorpion arrived. I picked up my sock, greeted my visitor, and escorted her outside. And with a heart of gratitude, I thanked her for the lesson because I knew that somehow I had summoned her, and her arrival was the reassurance that something was indeed about to change. I went to the front desk where the wise woman worked, and I told her about all of my experiences thus far. And she said, "Oh, you're not finished yet, girl. Go to the library, find the book, Animals Speak, and find out what the scorpion's message actually was." I found the book, turned to the page, Scorpion, and it read, "The Scorpion Promises Transformation." My mind was blown. I realized at that moment that all I needed to do was trust and keep paying attention. I returned home from my retreat a different person, but what I didn't realize was that this experience would symbolize the beginning of my menopause transition. My hormones were going on their very own roller coaster ride. The anxiety, insomnia, brain fog, and irritability were almost debilitating. I literally contemplated poisoning my husband. But after Googling it, I realized I was already caught. I had watched enough Dateline to know I wasn't smart enough to get away with that crime. By age 45, my periods had completely disappeared, but I was confused. How could an OBGYN be so clueless and unprepared for this phase of life? And why didn't I know about perimenopause? Why didn't I know that perimenopause could actually precede menopause by up to 10 years? The transformations kept coming. I became increasingly unsatisfied with work, and on a leap of faith, I went on to study integrative and functional medicine. On a wing and a prayer, I left a 20-year career in high-risk obstetrics to be an entrepreneur and start a wellness center. I completely changed my approach to women's health and healing, and I've spent the last 10 years coaching women through the same transition. I had to write a book about it, The Menopause Myth: What Your Mother, Doctor, and Friends Never Shared with You About Life After 35. Perimenopause represented one of the most tumultuous times of my life. It got real messy, but it's not a coincidence that as we get older, we're not willing to tolerate life the same way. As our estrogen levels fall, our brains actually rewire, and we go from being the necessary nurturers and those who take care of and pick up after everyone to being the women that we came here to be. I've come to realize that there's nothing more gratifying than watching a woman transform on her way to finding her true self. Whether it's finally leaving an unhappy marriage, that miserable job, or simply deciding that you're just not willing to live life under the same terms, the scorpion can represent the painful reminder that the current situation is no longer serving your highest good. It's been 20 years since I met that scorpion, and the transformations are still coming. And yes, they are still messy and even painful at times. But transformation is required if you're going to graduate, to pass from one stage or experience to another. But graduation requires releasing what doesn't serve us and embracing our highest good simultaneously. And boy, I know, I know that releasing part can be really, really hard. But I also know that embracing, that represents our infinite possibilities. And when we can get past the fear of the releasing part and be intentional about the embrace, the next level can only be better. So what might you consider releasing in order to graduate? But more importantly, what are you here to embrace? Here's a little secret, ladies. The transition, it's not about your menstrual cycle. It's about your evolution. The evolution that invites us to crack open the unknown and not only discuss